Welcome to the Cool Dad Loves Watches channel, and today we're going to compare the Seiko SKX and the Orient Ray II. We'll have a battle and evaluate them on the following 11 categories and give them a total score. So the categories today are movement, accuracy, design, bezel action, lume, crystal, bracelet, function, brand, value for money, the cool factor, since this is the Cool Dad Loves Watches channel, and the total score. There we go, cool factor and total score. Alright, so movement. Most of you all already know about the Seiko 7S26 movement. It's a workhorse. It's been around for over 20 years. It's found in the Seiko 5 watches as well and is very accurate. In fact, that's going to be in the next section, but this is a great movement. Of course, it doesn't hand wind and it doesn't hack, but with the magic lever system, it doesn't take a lot to get these watches going. On the other side, we have the Orient Ray II. Now, that has the in-house F6922 Orient movement. It has hacking and hand winding, and so that is a feature that the SKX doesn't have. So for that reason, I will give the nudge to the Ray II and give the Ray II 8 points versus 7 points for the SKX. Alright, next up we have accuracy. The Seiko 7S26 movement is very accurate. On most days, it will run about 2 seconds a day fast, maybe 3, but really close. It's the same movement that is found in the Seiko 5 watches, and my Seiko 5 watches are the most accurate automatic movement watches that I have. The Seiko movements tend to be, for my watches, the Seiko watches tend to be more accurate than the Orient watches. So the Orient, it can run as much as 20 seconds a day fast. Now, when I set both of these watches this morning, because of the change in daylight savings, I set them to the exact same time. I used the hacking function to set them to the exact same time. The Seiko is still pretty much running dead on to what it was set for, and as you can see, the Orient is running fast. So again, the Seiko is much more accurate. The Seiko 7S26 movement is much more accurate than the Orient Ray II, and for that reason I give the 7S26 a score of 9. That movement is one of the best movements I think you can buy, even though it's a very simple movement, a plain movement, and it doesn't hand wind and hack. It's dead on accurate, which is what you want with a watch. The Ray II, even though it has the hacking and winding, it's not that accurate, and it gets a score of 7. Next, let's talk design. The Seiko SKX looks like a classic tool watch. It has a printed dial and has the same classic dive watch look that its predecessors have had over the past 40 or 50 years, however long they've been making dive watches. I'm sure someone can tell us in the comments below when the first dive watch was, but this Seiko SKX keeps that classical tool watch looking design. The Orient Ray II has a little bit of a more dressy look to it. It's a little bit smoother. The bezel, of course, is a little bit more rounded. It slides under the cuff of a shirt a little bit easier. In fact, I wore this watch to testify before a General Assembly committee while wearing a suit. So it slips under the cuff and it looks great with a suit. So since it has that added functionality, I'm going to give an extra point to the Orient Ray II and give it the score of 8 versus the Seiko SKX with a score of 7. Next, let's talk bezel action. Of course, both of these are 120 click unidirectional bezels, which are very appropriate for diving. So if the bezel gets knocked around, if it gets moved, it will only cause a diver to come up sooner rather than later. thereby protecting their oxygen supply. First, let's look at the SKX. Of course, this one is smooth and easy to turn. It sounds good, it feels good, and it has a lot of good functionality for a dive watch. The Orient Ray II is a little bit harder to turn. You have to press down a little bit. Now, I guess if you were a diver, maybe you could argue that you want a bezel that can't be turned as easily. I'm not sure, but it's not as smooth as the Seiko SKX. So for that reason, I'm going to give the Seiko a score of 8 and the Orient Ray II a score of 7. Next, let's talk loom. I took some video earlier today, so let's cut to the loom shots.
We're going to charge both of these up an equal amount of time and then go inside to a dark room and film the results.
On the left you have the Orient Ray II and on the right the SKX.
As you can see from the video, both the Seiko SKX and the Orient Ray II seem to have about the same amount of loom, so I'm going to give both of those the score of 8. I know the Seiko has the Lumibright loom. I am not sure what the loom is for the Orient Ray II. If anyone knows, please tell us in the comments below. Moving on to the crystal. The Seiko has the world famous proprietary Hardlex crystal, and the Orient Ray II has the typical mineral crystal. Now supposedly the Hardlex crystal is a little bit more durable than your standard mineral crystal. Both of these have held up pretty well, so I'm not sure. But since the Seiko has the Hardlex system for their crystal, I'm going to give them a point more than the Orient. So the Seiko gets an 8 and the Orient gets a 7. Next, let's look at the bracelet. The thing that really causes some people a lot of issues is this Jubilee bracelet on this Seiko SKX. I personally love it. I think it's comfortable. Yes, it does have hollow end links, but so does the Orient Ray II. Both of them have hollow end links. People say that this Jubilee bracelet pulls the hair on their arms. I've not really found that. It does feel a little bit cheaper. The clasp feels a little bit cheaper, and the clasp on the Orient feels a little bit sturdier. The links are a little bit sturdier. They're heavier, so I would think that you could say that the construction of the bracelet for the Ray II is a little bit better than the bracelet for the Seiko SKX. It seems like the Orient Ray II bracelet could be found on a much more expensive watch, especially if it had solid end links. So for that reason, I'm going to give the Orient Ray II a score of 9 for their bracelet and the Seiko a score of 7. Next, function. These are both dive watches, so let's talk about functionality and being a dive watch. Well, everyone knows that the Seiko SKX dive watches are ISO certified for 200 meters. In other words, professional divers do use this watch, and they've used the predecessors of this watch, the previous Seiko dive watches, for many, many years, and they're accurate, and so it's a good dive watch. Since the Seiko has an ISO certification and it's 200 meters water resistant, I am going to give it a 9. The Orient Ray II, I do know that some divers have written in blogs that they have used the Orient Ray II diving without any issue, but it's not ISO certified, and so for that reason, since the function of this watch is to be a dive watch, and since the Seiko is ISO certified, it gets a score of 9, and the Orient Ray II gets a score of 7. Next, brand. Obviously, the Seiko brand has been around for over 100 years. The company was originally founded in 1895. The first watch that came out with the Seiko name came out in 1924. the Orient Watch Company was not founded until 1950. So the brand Seiko watches have a wide range of well-known types of watches, everything from Grand Seiko all the way down to Seiko 5. Orient has a similar type of system with the Orient Star, I believe, and then the Orient 3 Star, something like that. Somebody can explain more in the comments below. So it kind of mirrors Seiko, but it just doesn't have the same type of brand history and heritage that the Seiko does. So for all of those reasons, I am going to give the Seiko brand a score of 7 versus the Orient gets a score of 6. Next, value for money. This is a pretty easy one. I think most people would argue that value for money, the Orient Ray II probably beats the Seiko. This Orient Ray II I purchased on Amazon for $145. The Seiko I purchased for $215. So the Orient Ray II, you have the hand wind and hacking, and it can be used as a dress watch. It has that dress watch type of appeal to it. It can slide under the cuff. It has a lot of different functionality as far as that goes. So you can get a lot of bang for your buck with the Orient Ray II. For that reason, I give it an 8. But now as far as a true dive watch, I think you would say the Seiko does live up to that better than the Orient Ray II. But for $215 and the fact that they're still using the same 7S26 movement, they haven't upgraded to one of their movements that have hand winding and hacking. For those reasons, I'm going to give that a 6. Finally, the cool factor. Of course, the Seiko probably has the cool factor by a long margin. The predecessors to this watch, one of the predecessors to this watch was in a James Bond movie. It's been in other movies. It's a classic. Anybody that's a watch person that sees a Seiko SKX automatically will look at that and think that that is a cool watch. Well, probably most people, except for the one big guy that likes to yell a lot. Now, he may not like it, but the rest of the people probably are going to say that's pretty cool. The Orient Ray II, it's still a cool watch, but it just doesn't have the heritage. It doesn't have that wow factor that the Seiko SKX has. So for that reason, I'm going to give the Seiko SKX a score of 9 and the Orient Ray II a score of 6. The winner is, of course, the Seiko SKX with a score of 85 to the Orient Ray II score of 81. Both of these watches are amazing watches. Either watch you should be proud to own. I am proud to own both of these. I wear both of these on a regular basis. These are fantastic watches, but when you compare them side by side, I think the edge has to go to the Seiko SKX. Thanks for watching this video from the Cool Dad Loves Watches channel. Please like and subscribe. And as always, have a fantastic rest of your day. Take care.